She was late. Not catastrophically late, but the kind of late where you're power walking in heels and rehearsing your excuse in your head at the same time. The elevator at Desong Holdings headquarters was sleek, mirrored, silent. The kind that made you feel like the building was already judging you before you'd stepped inside. Tiana pressed the button for the 12th floor and exhaled. She caught her reflection in the polished steel door. There it was, lip gloss, slightly smudged at the corner from where she'd been biting her lip on the bus. She dug into her bag, found the small tube, coral pink, barely there shine, and fixed it quickly, pressing her lips together twice. Better. She looked nervous but presentable. She could work with nervous but presentable. The elevator doors slid open on the lobby level. A man stepped in. Tiana's first thought was that he was unfairly, almost offensively good-looking. Tall, broad-shouldered, the kind of clean, pressed suit that didn't come off a rack. His hair was dark and slightly pushed back, and he moved with the quiet ease of someone who had never needed to rush for anything in his life. He glanced at the panel, noted her floor was already selected, and stood beside her without a word. The doors closed. They were alone. Silence has weight, and this silence weighed something. Tiana stared straight ahead at the mirrored doors. She could see his reflection. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at nothing, perfectly composed, which somehow made her want to say something even more. She was like this when she was nervous. Her mother always said so. She talked. It was a reflex she'd never managed to cure. "First day," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. He looked over, calm. Mine," she clarified like he'd asked. "First day at this company. I'm a little—" She tilted her hand side to side, all over the place. The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, but close. He didn't say anything. "You work here?" she asked. "Yes," he said. That was it. Just yes. She should have stopped there. She did not stop there. "What floor?" 12, he said. "Same," she said, brighter than necessary. "So we'll be colleagues. Maybe, depending on which department." She laughed a little, the short, slightly self-conscious laugh she made when she was filling silence. "I was told the finance team is on 12, but I could be wrong. I've been wrong about a lot of things today already." He looked at her properly then. Not the way men sometimes looked at her, cataloging, measuring. This was different, attentive, like something she'd said had actually registered. "Finance," he confirmed. "So, colleagues," she said, and she couldn't quite help what came out next. She'd been nervous since 4:30 in the morning. She'd been on 2 buses. She was standing in a glass and steel tower in Gangnam in shoes that were already starting to pinch, and this man was standing in her elevator looking like he'd been lit by a professional, and something in her snapped into casual. "You know," she said, keeping her eyes on the mirrored doors, "if my boss is as cute as you, this job is going to be a lot easier to get through." The silence that followed was short. Then, quietly, a sound. Low, restrained. Almost like the beginning of a laugh that he'd cut off at the source. She looked at him. He was looking straight ahead again. The elevator chimed. 12th floor. The doors opened. They walked out together and then parted without ceremony. She went left toward the glass-walled reception area where a woman in a headset was waving her over, and he went right, around the curve of a corridor she hadn't yet learned. She didn't watch him go. She was already fishing her welcome packet out of her bag, already recalibrating into professional mode. She didn't think about him again until approximately 7 minutes later. Welcome to Afro-Korean drama. Everything you're about to hear is an original story, written and created for this channel. This one is about what it costs to be seen, and what it means to be seen first. If cross-cultural love stories with real tension and real stakes are your thing, you're already in the right place. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss stories like this. Drop in the comments where in the world you're watching from right now and what time it is there. Now let's keep going. The orientation session was brief. Tiana sat in a small glass-walled room with 3 other new hires. a quiet woman named Soyeon, who had joined from a competitor firm, and two men in their mid-20s who kept glancing at each other's phones. The HR coordinator walked them through the basics: badge access, reporting structure, conduct policy. Tiana took notes. She was the only one who took notes. When the session ended, the coordinator led them out to the open floor to introduce them to the broader team. Tiana scanned the room. Rows of clean desks, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Gangnam, the quiet hum of keyboards and muted phone calls. It smelled like air conditioning and expensive coffee. This was a real company, a serious one. After 8 months of rejection emails and second interviews that went nowhere, she was standing inside something real. She felt a hand touch her elbow, the coordinator, pointing toward a cluster of senior staff who were beginning to stand. Not stand up to stretch, stand up in that particular way, with posture, with attention, the way people rose when someone who mattered entered a room. Tiana turned. He came through the glass doors at the far end of the floor. The suit, the height, the unhurried, certain pace. Her stomach dropped so fast she felt it in her knees. He wasn't looking at the staff who were rising to greet him. He was scanning the room, the calm, systematic way he'd looked at the elevator panel. His eyes moved across the floor with the practiced efficiency of someone taking inventory of something he owned, and then they found her. He stopped walking for a fraction of a second, barely perceptible, nothing that anyone else would catch. But she caught it because she was already watching his face like it was the only thing in the room, willing it to be a mistake, willing her eyes to tell her she was wrong about what she was seeing. He wasn't wrong. She wasn't wrong. He resumed walking, unbuttoning the single button of his jacket as he moved toward the senior staff cluster. Someone leaned in and murmured something to him. He nodded. Then he glanced back in her direction, and this time he did not look away immediately. The coordinator materialized at Tiana's side. "New hires, I'll introduce you to the leadership team." "Actually," said a voice from across the room, quiet even, carrying without effort, "I can do that." He walked toward their small cluster. Tiana was aware that she was not breathing at a normal rate. He looked at each of the new hires in turn, brief and professional, then he reached Tiana. "Nice to see you again," he said. The words were bland on the surface, perfectly bland. "Miss?" "Tiana," she said, and then, because her mouth had apparently declared full independence from her brain this morning, she added, "I didn't catch your name. In the elevator." Something moved in his eyes, quiet, contained. He extended his hand. "Desong," he said, "CEO." The word landed like a stone dropped into still water. The HR coordinator made a small, strangled sound beside her. One of the young men in her cohort visibly stiffened. Soyeon kept her face entirely neutral, which Tiana would later learn was her permanent expression for all events, including emergencies. Tiana shook his hand. She had no other available option. Her grip was steady. She would not know until much later that she was the only person in that room who had ever shaken his hand without their palms sweating. He moved on. She did not. She stood where she was for a full 4 seconds after he walked away, replaying the last 40 minutes of her life in a rapid, horrified loop. "If my boss is as cute as you, this job is going to be a lot easier to get through." She had said that, out loud, to the CEO, on her first day. For the rest of the morning, she was technically present at her desk, oriented to her monitor, nodding at the right moments when Soyeon pointed things out. But inside, she was somewhere else entirely, running damage control on a situation that had already happened, strategizing around a problem that had no viable solution. Had he found it funny? Had he been offended? Had she, in the first 20 minutes of her first professional job in Seoul, already ended it? She thought about her mother, who had taken a second job cleaning offices so Tiana could finish university. She thought about her younger brother, who was in his second year and whose tuition she was supposed to start contributing to by December. She thought about the rejection emails, 41 of them, she had counted, that had come before this one acceptance. She could not lose this job. She would be invisible, completely, aggressively, professionally invisible. She would do her work, do it well, do it quietly, and she would not so much as make eye contact with Jin Desong for the remainder of her time at this company, which she planned to be extensive. She had a plan. It was a good plan. It lasted until 2:30 that afternoon. "Miss Tiana," she looked up from her monitor. One of the senior assistants, a man named Cha Min-soo, the kind of person who delivered information like he was issuing official statements, was standing at the edge of her desk. "The CEO wants the first quarter compliance briefs on his desk before end of day. He's asked for you to pull them." Tiana kept her expression very neutral. "Me? You were assigned to the compliance support function, yes?" "Yes, but there were 4 other people in that function who had been with the company longer, who knew the filing systems, who knew where things were." "Of course," she said. "I'll have them ready." She spent 90 minutes tracking down documents she didn't yet know how to find in a system she'd had 4 hours to learn, asking questions quietly, trying not to look lost, refusing to admit to any of the senior staff that she was floundering. She found everything. She organized the briefs by date, by subject matter, by relevance. She added a cover index. She double-checked her work. She left the folder on his assistant's desk at 4:58. She told herself it was a one-time thing, a new hire task, a test, maybe. The next morning, he called for her again. It was 2 days before Tiana stopped telling herself it was coincidence and started letting the anxiety she'd been carefully managing bloom into something larger. By then, Jin Desong had asked for her presence on 4 separate occasions, twice to compile reports, once to sit in on a briefing and take minutes, once for a reason that was never quite made clear to her, but had resulted in her spending 3 hours in a small glass-walled meeting room working on a document she'd been handed without context. She sat at her desk on Wednesday morning and tried to think it through rationally. He was embarrassed. That was it. He was trying to embarrass her back, systematically, in small professional increments, making her scramble, making her prove herself under pressure, demonstrating that her cockiness in the elevator was misplaced and that she was out of her depth. That made sense. That was the logical interpretation. She greeted him anyway. Every morning when she saw him cross the floor. "Good morning, sir." Small, polite, eyes briefly up, then back down. She was raised that way. Her grandmother's voice in her head always, "Girl, you greet people. You don't stop greeting people because you're afraid of them. That's when you greet them the most." He always paused, just slightly, and said, "Good morning," back. It was on Thursday that she overheard the conversation that reframed everything. She was in the small kitchen area adjacent to the main floor, waiting for the coffee machine, when 2 senior managers came in, deep in a conversation they clearly believed was private. "Wasn't supposed to be back until next week," one of them was saying. "The board meeting wasn't scheduled until the 15th. Apparently, he came in early, no notice to any of us. Which means Monday morning, nobody knew he was going to be in that building." Tiana was very still. She was looking at the coffee machine, but she was not seeing the coffee machine. Monday morning. He hadn't been supposed to be there. No one had known he was coming in, which meant the elevator, the lobby, none of it had been anything other than accident. Pure, unrepeatable accident. The CEO of Desong Holdings had stepped into an elevator at 7:48 in the morning, and a nervous new hire with lip gloss had been the only other person in it, and neither of them had had any idea who the other was. She thought about fate. She was not generally a person who thought about fate. She pushed it back down, but something loosened in her chest that she hadn't realized was tight. He wasn't punishing her. He couldn't be punishing her for something he had never anticipated either. Which meant the task assignments were something else, which meant she didn't actually know what any of this meant, and not knowing was its own particular torment. By the end of her first week, she had settled into a pace. She worked. She worked hard, the kind of hard that had nothing to perform about it, the kind that came from needing the job to be real and wanting to justify that need with something concrete. She was in before 8 every morning. She ate lunch at her desk more often than not, usually something she'd brought in a container from home because the convenience store options near the building were limited, and she was still managing her budget with the care she'd developed during the months of no income. On Friday, she found it. She was reviewing the quarterly regional compliance summary, a document she hadn't created but had been asked to verify before it went up the chain, and she found an error buried on page 17. A transposition in a figure from the Busan branch report. It wasn't obvious. Someone had clearly checked the document and missed it. The kind of thing that wouldn't necessarily cause catastrophe, but would cause embarrassment, and the kind of embarrassment that turned into something worse when it reached regulators. She fixed it. She didn't announce it. She corrected the figure, noted the correction in the version history with a timestamp and a brief description, and sent the document through as requested. She thought nothing more about it. She was eating her lunch on Tuesday, rice and braised tofu in a container, headphones in, working through a training module on the company's reporting software, when she became aware of someone stopping at the edge of her desk. She pulled one headphone out. Desong was standing there. He was looking at the container of food briefly, the way he looked at everything, with the same quiet attention he gave to balance sheets and personnel files. Then he looked at her. "The Busan figure," he said. She waited. "In the regional summary, the transposition error." "Yes, sir." "You caught it. It was in the document." 3 senior compliance staff reviewed that document before it reached you, he said. His voice was very even. None of them caught it. She didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. She had found, over the past week, that silence was often the better option around him. He didn't seem to need filling. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he said, "Good work," and walked away. It was 2 words, professionally delivered, completely standard. She went back to her training module, but something had changed in his expression in that moment. Something that had shifted from the particular curiosity he'd been carrying since Monday towards something that looked, very briefly, like respect. Tiana didn't allow herself to examine that too closely. She ate her tofu and kept reading. It was the following week that the rumors started. She noticed it the way you always noticed that kind of thing, not in one clear moment, but in the accumulation of small, wrong things. A conversation that stopped when she walked past. A look between 2 women at the adjacent desk cluster that lasted a beat too long. Soyeon, who never offered unsolicited information about anything, leaning over on Wednesday afternoon and saying quietly, "People are talking." "About what?" Tiana asked. Soyeon looked at her. "About you and the CEO. They're saying you planned it." "Planned what?" "The elevator." Tiana sat very still. "I didn't know who he was." "I know," Soyeon said. "I'm telling you what they're saying." The source, it turned out, though Tiana never confirmed this directly, was a woman named Park Ji-won, who had been with Desong for 3 years and who, if the quiet architecture of office dynamics that Tiana was learning to read was accurate, had been positioning herself near Jin Dae-sung for most of them. Ji-won was polished and precise and professionally impeccable, and she had a gift for social engineering so elegant it barely looked like engineering at all. The story that began circulating was specific and believable in the way that effective rumors always were. That Tiana, knowing the CEO would be in the building that morning, had manufactured the elevator encounter deliberately. That the lip gloss, the chatter, the boldness, all of it had been calculated. That she was the kind of woman who used her looks and her energy to climb, and that the CEO, new to her, had not yet figured that out. Tiana heard a version of this on Thursday morning, secondhand, and sat with it at her desk for approximately 20 minutes before she decided to eat her feelings with a small triangle of kimbap she'd been saving for later. What she couldn't decide was whether to do anything about it. She had no proof. She had no real allies yet in this office. Soyeon was steady and kind, but not the type to fight battles. She had no standing to go to HR. What she had was her work, and her record, and the knowledge, which she would keep entirely to herself, that the only person in this building who knew the whole truth of that Monday morning was standing in the corner office behind the glass wall, and that she would rather resign than go and ask him to vouch for her. She kept working. She kept greeting him in the mornings. "Good morning, sir." Small, consistent, even when the looks from Jiwon's corner of the floor made the back of her neck prickle. And then she heard about the CCTV. It started as a casual comment, someone near the kitchenette saying offhand that the elevator cameras had caught everything, that whatever had happened in there on Monday morning was technically on record. Tiana heard it in fragments, pieces reaching her through the ordinary noise of the floor, and each fragment landed somewhere sensitive. If there was footage, if he had watched it, if he had sat in his office and reviewed the security tape and seen her fixing her lip gloss and flirting with a stranger who turned out to be him. She felt ill. She sat at her desk that afternoon completely unable to focus, running the footage in her own mind the way she imagined he might be watching it. The cap off the gloss, the pressing of her lips together, the way she'd turned when he stepped in, the things she'd said, the tone, the ease of it, how completely, utterly unguarded she'd been. She went home that night and did not sleep well. What she didn't know, what nobody had thought to mention because it was so ordinary a maintenance complaint that it had simply become part of the building's background reality, was that the elevator's CCTV system had been malfunctioning for 4 months. The camera mounted in the upper left corner of the car recorded a perfect black screen. Facilities had submitted 2 repair requests. Both were pending budget approval. There was no footage of Monday morning. There was no footage of any morning. Desong did not know what Tiana had said about lip gloss or the color of her voice when she was nervous. He only knew what he'd experienced directly, the warm collision of a stranger's honesty in a small, mirrored space, and the fact that he'd thought about it, intermittently, for 7 days. The next morning, he called her into his office. She sat across from his desk and watched him review something on his monitor with the same bottomless composure he brought to everything. The office had 3 glass walls and 1 solid one. She could feel the floor watching from outside, though she didn't look. She kept her hands in her lap and her back straight. "The Q3 regional breakdowns," he said, not looking up. "The format needs to be standardized before they go to the board. I need someone who can manage the consolidation." "Of course," she said. He looked up then. "That will require weekly check-ins." She nodded. The floor was definitely watching. She worked on the consolidation project for 9 days. It was good work, complex and interesting in a way she hadn't expected, involving 6 branch reports with incompatible formats and a historical discrepancy in how 2 regional managers had been defining a key metric. She untangled it. She built a clean master template, documented her methodology, and delivered it 4 days ahead of the internal deadline. It was during those 9 days that she realized something she hadn't wanted to realize. She liked working with him, not in a sentimental way, in the way she liked things that were exact and required her full attention. He was precise in what he asked for and direct in his feedback, and he never wasted her time with qualifications or performance. When something was wrong, he said so. When something was right, he said that too. He was also, she noticed, watching her. Not the way Ji-won's crowd watched her, not measuring or suspicious. He watched the way she would catch him watching the floor from his glass office, taking inventory, noting things. She saw him once, through the glass, pause over something on her desk when she was away from it. She couldn't tell what. She thought about asking. She didn't ask. She thought about the rumor. She thought about the CCTV she still believed existed. She thought about the 12 people who had now stopped inviting her to the lunch runs that left the building at 12:30 every day. She couldn't let this continue. On a Thursday afternoon, she knocked on his open office door. "Sir, do you have a moment?" He looked up. "Come in." She stepped inside. She'd thought about how to phrase this for 2 days, and every version had felt wrong, and so she'd decided to just say it as it was. "I'd like to request a transfer," she said, "to a different department. I think it would be better for the team." He looked at her. The expression on his face did not change, which was its own kind of information. "Why?" he asked. "The elevator situation," she said. "I'm aware it caused something of an impression. I don't want you to feel—" she was careful, precise, "that my presence in this function is uncomfortable for you." The silence that followed lasted long enough that she became aware of the ambient sound of the building: ventilation, distant keyboards, the low hum of the city far below the windows. "Miss Tiana," he said, and his voice was exactly what it always was, even, low, unhurried. "You're the only one in this building who has been uncomfortable." She looked at him. He looked back at her. "The elevator," he said, and there was a pause so small she almost missed it. "Was not a problem for me." She didn't know what to say. She had prepared for several responses. She had not prepared for that one. "The transfer request is denied," he said, and returned to his monitor. She left. She walked back to her desk. She sat down. She put her hands flat on the surface of her desk and stared at her dark monitor for a moment before turning it back on. She spent the rest of the afternoon working in a state of concentrated blankness that she would not fully process until much later. It happened on a Thursday night, 11 days after she'd started. She was still at her desk at 9:30, finishing the final section of the regional consolidation because the methodology document had needed reworking after she'd found a better approach halfway through, and she didn't leave things half done. The floor was empty. The lights had dimmed to their after-hours setting. Somewhere in the building, a cleaning crew was moving through a distant section. Otherwise, silence. She heard his door open. She didn't look up immediately. She kept typing. "You're still here," he said. "Finishing something," she said. He came out of the office, and instead of taking the elevator, which he should have, it was past 9 and there was no version of this where staying made professional sense, he walked to the desk adjacent to hers. He didn't sit. He stood, in the particular way of someone who has been very still for many hours and has come to the edge of where stillness is useful. She saved her document. She looked at him. He looked out the window for a moment. The city below was a patchwork of light: apartment towers, the elevated highway, the green glow of a convenience store on the corner. "People," he said quietly, "behave very differently around me here than they do elsewhere." She waited. "In meetings, they agree with things they don't agree with. In hallways, they move differently when I'm present. In the elevator," a short pause, "they look at their phones." She thought, "I did not look at my phone." "Monday," he said, "was the first time someone talked to me in that building like a normal person in—" He thought about it, and then said honestly, "I don't actually know how long." The city hummed below. She could hear the distant compression of traffic. The air conditioning cycled softly. "You didn't know who I was," he said. It wasn't a question. "I would have behaved exactly the same way if I had," she said, and then caught herself because that wasn't strictly true. "Maybe the last line I would have kept to myself." He looked at her. Something shifted in his face, not quite a smile, but the honest cousin of one. "The job," he said. "You need it." "Yes." "Your family." She looked at him. She had mentioned nothing. "How do you—" "You skipped lunch 14 of the past 18 working days," he said simply. "You bring food from home. You came in early on the day your salary schedule would have been confirmed. You work like someone who can't afford to fail." She sat with that for a moment. Being seen, she was finding, was not always comfortable, not when someone paid that quality of attention. "Yes," she said, "my family." He nodded once. "I respect that," he said, and she believed him because she had learned by now that he didn't say things to fill space. "I respect a lot of things about your work." She didn't answer. There didn't seem to be an answer required. They stayed there for a moment, her at her desk, him at the window, the city spread out below them, in a silence that was not empty at all. Then he straightened, picked up the jacket he'd draped over a chair, and said, "Go home. Finish the document tomorrow." She went home. She thought about it for a very long time on the bus. The next morning, he did not call her for any tasks. She told herself it was normal, a light day, a shift in project priorities. She focused on her own work and kept her head down. By Wednesday, she knew it wasn't a light day. He had stopped assigning anything to her at all. He didn't look her way when he crossed the floor. His morning acknowledgement of her greeting was still there, "Good morning," but there was a slight, careful distance to it now that hadn't been there before. Not coldness, nothing sharp, just space. Like he had taken a step back from something. She tried not to mind. She told herself it was probably better. It was definitely better. It was the thing she had wanted 2 weeks ago, to be invisible, to do her work and not be entangled. She minded. She sat at her desk on Thursday and did not examine why she minded, because examining it would require her to acknowledge things that were not useful to acknowledge. She worked. She ate her lunch. She filed her documents. She was professional and thorough and present, and somewhere behind all of that, something in her chest had a low ache that she refused to name. It was So-yeon, as it turned out, who found out first. So-yeon was the kind of person who knew the administrative infrastructure of any organization she joined within 2 weeks, not because she was nosy, but because she considered it relevant data. On Thursday afternoon, she leaned over and said, with the same tone she used for everything, "He put in a transfer request for you." Tiana looked up slowly. "What?" "To the strategy team. Same grade, slightly broader scope. The request came through HR this morning." Tiana put down her pen. "He requested my transfer." "Technically, yes." She thought about the transfer she'd requested. Denied. And now he had done it himself, without telling her, through official channels, to a department where he wasn't her direct line of reporting, wasn't her indirect line either. She thought about what that meant. She sat with it for a long time. What it meant to be someone who had the power to transfer you, and who used that power not to punish you, not to remove you, but to move you somewhere you could no longer be called his employee. Because if she wasn't his employee, then what she'd felt in the late-night office, the quiet pull of sitting near someone who saw her, genuinely, with no performance required, that would exist in a different kind of space. Without rank between them, without HR policy between them, without the specific guilt of knowing that any movement toward each other could be read as him abusing his position. He had thought about all of this. He had solved for all of this. Not with a speech, not with a grand gesture, with paperwork. She sat at her desk and felt something happen in her chest that she was not going to describe as anything romantic, because she was practical and careful and not the kind of woman who read meaning into bureaucratic processes, and also it was completely a romantic feeling. There was no other word for it. Her last day in the compliance support function was a Friday. She'd said goodbye to the people she'd connected with. So-yeon, who pressed her hand once and said, "Strategy team is good for you," and the junior analyst who'd helped her figure out the filing system on her first Tuesday. She'd cleaned out her small section of the shared supply drawer. She'd submitted her final project documents. She was carrying her things toward the elevator at 5:40 when she heard footsteps behind her. She pressed the button. The elevator opened. She stepped in. He stepped in after her. The doors closed. For a moment, neither of them said anything. It was the same elevator, the same mirrored walls, the same faint hum of the cable system. She was very aware of her reflection in the doors, the natural hair she'd been growing out since she'd arrived in Seoul, the simple gray blazer, the coral lip gloss that she had, out of sheer habit, reapplied before leaving her desk. She watched him in the reflection. He was already watching her. He said, "If my employee is as cute as you..." She turned and looked at him directly. He held her gaze, and the corner of his mouth moved. The same movement it had made the first time, except now it completed itself. An actual, complete, quiet smile. "I might fall in love at work," he said. She stared at him. "That is a terrible line," she said. "Yes," he agreed, without any indication that he was bothered by this. "You've been planning that." "Since about the third morning," he said. "When you said good morning even though you were terrified of me." She looked at him. He looked back. The elevator was still descending, floor 11, 10, 9. She became aware that at some point her expression had shifted from stunned into something she could not entirely control. "You moved my department," she said. "You're not my employee anymore," he said. Simple, factual, exactly the way he said everything. "I noticed. I wanted to be able to ask you something without it being complicated. And now it's not complicated?" He considered this seriously. "It's probably still a little complicated," he said, "but the right kind." The elevator reached the lobby. The doors slid open onto the marble entrance hall, people moving through, a security guard at his station, the city visible through the revolving glass doors beyond. The ordinary, enormous, indifferent world. Neither of them moved immediately. "Dinner," he said. "Tomorrow, if you want." She thought about the first morning, the lip gloss, the mirror, the voice in her head that had said something she hadn't been able to stop. She thought about 41 rejection emails and 2 buses and a pair of heels that had pinched all day. She thought about aversion history on a compliance document and a late-night city seen from 12 floors up. She thought about a man who had solved for her without being asked, quietly, through HR paperwork, because he didn't want her to be in a complicated position on his behalf. "Yes," she said, "tomorrow." The elevator doors had been open for several seconds. A man in the lobby caught the door to hold it. They both stepped out. She went left, he went right. But this time, both of them were smiling. You know what stayed with me when I finished writing this one? It wasn't the big moment in the elevator at the end. It was the version history. The idea that he pulled up a document and found a quiet correction from someone who fixed a problem and told nobody. That's how it really starts, isn't it? Not with grand gestures, with someone noticing that you do things right even when no one is watching. Tell me, do you think Desong handled the situation the way he should have? Was the HR transfer move genuinely thoughtful, or did he still overstep? And what would you have done in Tiana's position? Would you have pushed back, or let it play out the way she did? If original stories like this one are something you look forward to, subscribing to Afro Korean drama means you won't miss what's coming next. Thank you for watching this all the way through. That means everything.